Let's start off with digital content today, and digital content comes under the heading of secondary data. Why is it secondary data? It is secondary data because this data has not been collected by the sociologist himself. This data has not been collected by the sociologist himself or herself, and that is why it gives us all the reasons to call it a secondary data if a sociologist uses digital content. One. Number two, if we talk about secondary data, initially we had spoken about official statistics being used by sociologists under the heading of quantitative research methods, and then we moved on towards qualitative research methods where we spoke about personal documents. Now that we're done discussing official statistics and personal documents, the third in line today is digital content, right? The digital content, when we use the word digital content, I'm assuming everyone does have an idea about what digital content is, from photographs to videos to any blog to any website to any email to any social media website, right? If content is picked up from sources from the ones that I just mentioned and later on used by a sociologist, it wouldn't be wrong to refer to them as an example of digital content and further as an example of secondary data. Taking it a step further, having a look at what the book has to say over here, digital content relies on the internet for distribution. Of course it does, it relies on the internet for distribution. It includes virtual or online documents such as websites, emails, postings to online forums and blogs, videos and social media such as the Facebook and Twitter. Now, if you remember in the last class, we had spoken about when we were discussing qualitative data, right? When we were discussing qualitative data under the heading of secondary researches or secondary data. So we had spoken about John Scott. John Scott in 1990 came up with 4 different quality control criterias, and to remind you all, they were: number 1, authenticity, credibility, representativeness and meaning. Remember, authenticity, किस हद तक वो डेटा जो आप यूज़ कर रहे हो, जिस भी कोई भी सोर्स हो, जिस किस हद तक आपको लगता है कि वो आपकी सोर्स ऑथेंटिक है. नंबर 2, जिस सोर्स से आप डाटा गैदर कर रहे हैं, क्या उसकी क्रेडिबिलिटी हाई है या नहीं है, द लाइकलीहुड ऑफ इट बीइंग क्लोज टू रियलिटी और बीइंग डिस्टॉर्टेड. नंबर 3, रिप्रेजेंटेटिवनेस. Try your level best as a researcher that the data that you're gathering is representing whatever issue or the social group that you're trying to conduct your research on well. Because remember, my dear, if a research is not representative, if the sample in a research is not representative of the target population, the likelihood of the findings being generalizable would be low. जब तक आपका सैम्पल रिप्रेजेंटेटिव नहीं होता टारगेट पॉपुलेशन का, तब तक बेटा आपकी फाइंडिंग्स को आप जनरलाइजेबल नहीं कह सकते. एंड द फोर्थ वन, मीनिंग. Are you as a researcher interpreting that data or the content that you're using as a source in the same manner as it was intended by the author? Right? Now, the 4 criteria, authenticity, credibility, representativeness and meaning for assessing personal documents, can also be applied to digital content. For example, why a particular website was built. Does it exist to promote a cause or to sell something? What is the theme? What's the ideology? Get it? Now, taking it a step ahead, moving on. If we talk about the strengths of digital content, the first one, I'm sure everyone would agree to this, there's an enormous amount of variety that is available online. It's quick, usually easily accessible, and you have a lot of variety. A few clicks here and there and you'd come across so much of content that you initially probably did not even have an idea about, right? Another very important aspect that we shouldn't miss on at this point is अक्सर आपको चीज़ें इंटरनेट पे you get them for free, or even if they're not free. Like for instance, if you simply type down social trends UK, look at the enormous amount of data that you get, and most of it is free. Even if you're paying something for it, the amount that you're paying is a trivial amount as compared to the cost that particular organization or whoever gathered that data might have incurred. So that's again an advantage. One. Number two, when you talk about digital content को अक्सर एक rich source of qualitative data माना जाता है, because especially when you talk about videos, from Instagram to Facebook to YouTube to so many other sources, there's enormous amount of qualitative data that you can gather. But it's not only qualitative data. Along with qualitative data आपको अक्सर quantitative data भी मिल जाता है. अब इस quantitative data की जब हम बात करते हैं, remember I guess a minute back we were talking about, I was giving you an example of social trends. Everyone has Google. You can simply type down social trends. You can look at the amount of data you get out of there. Number 4, as the content was not created for research purpose, it is not influenced by an interviewer or observer. Neutrality. We're not saying it isn't biased. Whatever the data is, there is a high chance that it might be biased. But then again, your values as a researcher are not involved in it. आप as a researcher, आपकी values उसमें involved नहीं हैं. क्या उसमें और किसी की values हैं? Of course हो सकती हैं. The sociological organization, or whatever the organization, sociological or otherwise organization that has collected and compiled all of that data, their values might be there. If it's a government, if it's a website that the state is running, the political party who is governing, there might be their values that would be involved, but you as a researcher, dear, your values would not be involved in it. Are we good? Does anyone have any question regarding these 4 strengths of digital content? Tiny topic like these, they could be there in your section A. Remember, my kids, your section A is 34 marks. The possibility of you getting a 4 marker, 6 marker, or an 8 marker is always there, right? If you've understood these strengths, let's move on and talk about the limitations of digital content. The first and the foremost, not everyone has access to the internet. Talk about Pakistan. It's a developing country. There are so many underdeveloped countries as well. Or internet facility, I don't know if you have an idea about this, internet facility abroad in more developed countries like the UK and USA. If you compare them with the internet facilities that we have in Pakistan, you'd see a huge difference. One. Number 2, not everyone does post something on the internet. Not everyone does that. There are a huge amount of people who don't, who just there. Clear, dear? So in this case, the individuals who are posting something or who are uploading something online, compared to the ones who do not, they might differ. And it wouldn't be wrong if we say there's a selective amount of people. There are fewer people who do upload things on the internet. And of course, for a viewer, for an audience, before even a researcher, for an audience, it's the view of those people who choose to upload whatever their views are, or whatever the content they have, which again is different from the ones who choose not to. The next disadvantage, ji beta.
Sir, it could be less representative.
Exactly. As amazingly put, it could be less representative. It's not representative of the target population. If it's not representative of the target population, how likely is it that you'd be able to generalize those findings ahead? One. Number two, as a result, the authors of digital content may not be typical of the wider population. In general, for example, younger people are more likely to post blogs than people in the 80s. We all know this. Number three, there's no quality controlling mechanism. Yes, there are certain regulatory authorities, but the extent to which they can keep a check is again questionable. As they say, for every correct thing on the internet, there are chances of you having an exact amount of incorrect things being posted there or uploaded there as well. If you aren't sure about if you aren't certain about the credibility, if you aren't sure about the extent to which the content that is there, if it is true or not, would you even be able to rely on it? Would it be reliable? Probably not. Do we understand this? Right? There are so many forums that deliberately distort reality. There are so many political parties, there are so many governments, there are so many countries. A very simple example, if there's anything that happens in Pakistan, if you want to have an idea about this, or if you actually want to test this, you watch news from Pakistan and then you go to YouTube and watch news from India. You'd come across a huge difference in terms of how the same event or issue is being presented by different news channels. Does everyone understand this? Any question? Now, taking it a step further, to remind you all, we were discussing digital content. We spoke about the strengths and limitations of digital contents, of the use of digital content as a secondary form of data used by sociologists. Now, again, there are two more disadvantages. Let's cater to these before we proceed. The researcher cannot probe to find out more about the poster or their postings. Do we understand this? If you as a researcher come across something that was uploaded by someone on YouTube maybe, do you think it would be easy for you to trace that person? Do you think it would be easy for you to have further access to the views of that person? If there is clarity required, the platform, whatever the platform is that you're using, that platform might be interactive. There might be an option of two-way communication. Let's just say if it's YouTube, you do have an option of commenting. But don't you think this option in itself is pretty restricting? The next disadvantage, the number of research questions that can be explored by posting is limited compared to the use of unstructured interviews, of course. Clear here? Do we all understand this? Now, before we proceed to another example of secondary data, let me talk about the difference between, let me take some space over here. Let's talk about the difference between traditional media and new media. When I use the word traditional media, I'm actually referring to newspapers, magazines, television, radio, books, so on and so forth. Newspapers, magazines, TVs, radios, books, etc., they all come under the heading of traditional media. However, when you talk about new media dear has to do with the internet. From YouTube to Facebook to Snapchat to digital content. We could write down digital content over here. Do we understand this? Right? So, now that we're done discussing the new media under the heading of digital content, we'd move on and we'd speak about traditional media over here. And number one, we'd understand, we'd try to figure out traditional media किस तरीके से एक secondary source of data use की जाती है sociologist से. Number two, we talk about the strengths and limitations of the usage of traditional media. To get started with this, if we talk about traditional media sources include radio and television, podcasts, music, films, novels, newspapers, and magazines. They contain both visual and written text and are usually referred to as the mass media. Now, why are they referred to as the mass media? Because they cater to the masses. A simple example, this projector that we have in front of us, this projector can cater 30 people to 300 people, right? Right now, I'm writing on this iPad screen, which is being projected through the projector. I don't know if you do know this, these projectors, they were formerly known as the mass media projectors. Some people still do call them mass media projectors. Why the term mass? Because you're able to cater to the masses. Have a look at these ones. अखबार, एक अखबार आप प्रिंट करते हैं, पब्लिश होता है, हज़ारों लोग पढ़ सकते हैं. So is the case with magazines or the content you get to view on television or the content that you get to hear through radio, through books. Clear, dear? Now taking it a step ahead, they contain both visual and written text and are usually referred to as the mass media as opposed to the new media of digital content. This is exactly what I was trying to explain you. Although some parts of the mass media may provide sociologists with useful data, their main importance is as objects of study. Mass media reports can be used to analyze the ideologies of those who produce them. Of course, when you'd be studying media in A2s, you'd come across the Marxist perspective, you'd come across the pluralist perspective, the two main ones. And I'm sure by now you all do have an idea, according to the Marxist perspective, whatever is shown on, let's just say, television is what the bourgeoisies want you to see. Relatable? Because they're the ones who own media organizations. They're the ones who are very selectively setting an agenda. If they're very selectively setting an agenda, they are deliberately choosing to show you what they want you to see. They're choosing to show you what they want you to see, the way they want you to see it. Clear, dear? So, your ideologies, for sociologists, your ideologies matter, and they matter a lot. Some sociologists have been highly critical of parts of the media for producing distorted images of society that might mislead the public or adversely affect the socialization of children. Of course, there's so much that you come across on the media, traditional or otherwise, which might not be appropriate for the vulnerable audience, especially children. Your view today about Israel, Kashmir, or India is what the media has been showing you all along. I mean, for you all, it's digital content more. From the generation I belong to, I mean, when I was your age, digital media wasn't as advanced as it is today. Things were very different. Clear, dear? Now, taking it ahead, strengths of media sources. The media provide a useful source of information on a variety of issues and events. I don't think I don't think you would disagree to this. I believe this is true to quite an extent. Moving on to the second advantage, television programs and newspaper articles were not produced by or for a researcher for research purpose. As a result, there is no reactive effect to limit the validity of the data. Like I had mentioned earlier when we were discussing digital content, you come across data that has been collected and presented by someone who's probably neutral. I mean, at least you neutral because you aren't the one who produced it. With a high likelihood of whoever has produced it having his or her own ideology that they're trying to follow, or the owner of that particular media channel, their ideology. Get it, dear? Right? Moving on towards the limitations. Number one, many parts of the mass media are notoriously inaccurate and unlikely to provide objective accounts of social life. I'm sure no one would disagree to this as well. Inaccuracy through the media, distorted images of reality through the media, misrepresentation of certain social groups, political affiliations, supporting particular agendas and not others, deliberately hiding things from the way they actually are like, for various reasons. All of this eventually is bad. It's bad for the audience, and of course, if the researcher isn't careful about all of this, this is eventually going to affect the researcher's work as well. Do we get this? Everyone, do we proceed? So yeah, now that we're done discussing digital content and traditional media sources, let's move on and talk about the methods that have been used or that are used to analyze qualitative secondary data. Our focus over here would be on content analysis. Let me make you familiar with this term content analysis first, and then we'd move on and discuss different approaches used for content analysis. The first, what was I saying? Yeah. Initially, we talk about content analysis. The term content analysis is used usually to refer to the researches in which you're collecting data through the media. ठीक है? हम लोग content analysis का term use करते हैं उन data के लिए जो कि आप research के लिए gather कर रहे होते हैं media के through. ठीक है? So, various types of content analysis are used to analyze qualitative secondary data such as the media images on television or in newspapers. Pawson in 1995 identifies four main approaches to content analysis, and they are formal content analysis, thematic analysis, textual analysis, and audience analysis. Now, to start off with the first one, that is formal content analysis. What exactly is formal content analysis? Now, before we proceed, this content analysis has been there in your papers. I mean, if we talk about our past papers, we used to have questions on this, but they more or less revolved around 4 markers, right? Now that we're following this particular book, and this book has mentioned the 4 different approaches that were put forward by Pawson, we might as well go through them as well. But पिछला अगर हम track देखते हैं तो इसके ऊपर कोई बड़ा question नहीं आया अभी तक. So when you talk about formal content analysis, you know what? When watching a particular television channel or reading through a particular newspaper, if I ask you a simple question, कि कल के दिन, that is the 25th 5th, yeah, it was the 25th November. How many times did you come across the word petrol on ARY News? That would be an example of quantitative data collection and would come under the heading of formal content analysis, right? Now, likewise, if we talk about representation of women or the portrayal of women. Now, I'll give you another example. You've seen detergent advertisements on television where you come across Surf Excel, दाग तो अच्छे होते हैं. I'm sure Ariel has a line with it too. And there are others like Bright sa Bright kar dega, right? Do you see there are more of females in advertisements that we have for detergents, for washing powders, right? तो जेंडर की बेसिस पे आप कैटेगराइज कर सकते हैं कि डिटर्जेंट की जो एडवर्टिजमेंट्स होती है उसमें किस हद तक आपको ख़वातीन नज़र आती हैं. That again is an example of quantitative data, right? Another example, the term Islam and terrorism together. How many times have you come across this term together on any channel in the last, let's say, 5 years? Do we get this? Right? So, formal content analysis is a quantitative research method that attempts to classify and quantify the content of a source in a systematic way. At its simplest, it counts how often words, phrases, and images appear. Do we understand this? Everyone? Do we proceed? Now, we could have a look at this example as well. In Mauritius, for instance, no women were presented in print, radio, and television stories for politics-related news on the day of the monitoring. We talk about a particular day when content was being monitored, and this is what was found out. And all of this is a research like this or data collection like this comes under the heading of formal content analysis. Do we get this? Now, taking it ahead, moving on to the next one, that is thematic analysis. Now, when we talk about thematic analysis, of course, this comes from the word theme. Thematic analysis looks for the guiding themes of the professionals, or in other words, it focuses on the motives, intentions, and underlying ideologies of the author. Now, let me give you a very simple example. If you have a look at this example that I've mentioned over here, when there was this, when Americans, they had their troops in Afghanistan, not only did they have their troops, they had their own journalists too. Do you know this? They had their own journalists there. They were capturing and showing people back home the reality they wanted to show, which again would be very different from how the Afghanis might have seen it. Clear? So, thematic analysis, my dear, looks for the guiding themes of the professionals. It focuses on the motives, intentions, and underlying ideologies of the author or whoever the person who's producing that data. Do we get this? And of course, अगर आप पर्टिकुलर थीम को, आइडियोलॉजी को फॉलो कर रहे हो बेटा, तो आपकी न्यूट्रलिटी तो कॉम्प्रोमाइज़ हो जाएगी ना. अब फिर कैसे कह सकते हो कि आपका जो डाटा जो आपने गैदर किया वो न्यूट्रल है? फिर तो आप नहीं कह सकते कि आपका डाटा न्यूट्रल है. डू वी गेट दिस बेटा? Now that we have an idea about formal content analysis, and next in line we discuss thematic analysis, moving on towards textual analysis. Just in case if you're having any problem differentiating amongst them, there were 4. The first one was formal content analysis, where we discussed, you could keep a hint for yourself. It had more to do with quantitative data numbers. Number 2, thematic comes from the word theme. Textual analysis comes from the word text. The way you come across captions. You do come across captions, right? कैप्शंस आपके पास जो होते हैं या आपके पास हेडलाइंस होते हैं, वो उस पर्टिकुलर इवेंट को या उस पर्टिकुलर इशू की तरफ आपका, it wouldn't be wrong for us to use the word discourse. That might also be referred to as preferred reading. प्रेफर्ड रीडिंग कहते हैं, डिस्कोर्स कहते हैं, आपका उस पर्टिकुलर इवेंट की तरफ एक पर्टिकुलर पर्सपेक्टिव बना देते हैं वो. इट्स अ वे ऑफ शोइंग थिंग्स द वे दे वांट यू टू सी इट. For instance, let me show you a picture. Now, if you have a look at this picture, I don't know if I'd be able to zoom it. If you have a look at this picture, this lady, she's a politician she's a politician in a country. Now, I mean, this picture, if you had to caption this picture, this could have possibly been, what caption do you think you could have put? You could have mentioned how a politician is very amazingly playing the role of a household lady, maybe, because I believe she's busy shopping, or at least it looks like she's shopping, right? Or you could have written, or there could have been a caption that might have something to do with that was good about her. Like, for instance, she was there at a bakery or a supermarket trying to figure out how the items were there, or a random regular check on prices. On the other hand, this picture was under the heading of this.
Yes.
The focus over here was on what brand her slippers were from and how much did they cost. Isn't this an example of preferred reading? Isn't this, I mean, through text, you're doing all of this through text, right? There could have been, I mean, if you talk about this picture, this could have possibly had a caption, Miss XYZ from political party XYZ attending a meeting. Look at this. Do you understand this? Do I need to explain this any further? No? The smiles on your faces explain it all. So yeah, textual analysis involves a close examination of the text to see how the words and phrases used encourage a particular reading of it. The Glasgow University Media Group, also known as the GUM. I hope you've understood all of this. Thank you. He has been working on this particular subject matter. There's this very popular, example or reference that we keep on using here. Back in the 1990s, there were clashes between industrialists and the workers. And of course, if you're talking about how the workers are portrayed as compared to how the owner of that factory or industry is portrayed, right? If you talk about workers, you'd see workers being unrealistic, being very aggressive. देखें, एक सिंपल मैं आपको एग्जांपल दे दूँ. अगर आप दिखाना चाह रहे हो, एक स्ट्राइक कॉल की हुई है वर्कर्स ने, तो वर्कर्स आपको अग्रेसिव नज़र आएंगे, आपको इम्पोलाइट नज़र आएंगे, आपको अब्यूजिव नज़र आएंगे, आपको डिमांडिंग नज़र आएंगे, आपको थ्रेटनिंग नज़र आएंगे, आपको वायलेंट नज़र आएंगे. On the other hand, you go and interview the owner of their organization or any representative, a cool, calm, contained individual sitting in an air-conditioned, well-dressed, speaks nicely, is trying to be requestive, offering, polite. It's a portrayal through the media. Do we get this? Everyone? Now, the Glasgow University Media Group, GUMG, 1976 study of televised reporting of strikes in Britain provides an example. Strikers tend to be reported using verbs such as claim or demand, while management were reported using verbs such as an offer and propose. As a result, managers appear to be reasonable and ready to negotiate, whereas the strikers appear to be demanding and uncompromising. Textual analysis often involves the use of semiology. semiology, the use of signs, or the analysis of signs. Does everyone understand this? Does anyone have any question or any difficulty understanding formal content analysis, thematic analysis, textual analysis? The next in line over here is audience analysis. When we talk about audience analysis, don't you think it would be wrong to assume that the audience are a homogeneous, uncritical social group? ऑडियंस आपकी ज़रूरी थोड़ी कि पैसिवली हर चीज़ को रिसीव करे. आप ऑडियंस हैं जनाब, आपके सामने एक एडवर्टीजमेंट आती है, क्या आप सारे उसे एक ही तरीके से परसीव करते हैं, एक ही तरीके से रिसीव करते हैं? अलग अलग लोग अलग अलग सोशल ग्रुप्स के लोगों से अलग अलग तरीके से रिसीव करेंगे. Audiences very actively, according to this audience analysis, according to audience analysis, audiences should not be considered to be passive. Instead, they very actively negotiate the meaning of messages. There's a particular show that you've watched on Netflix, or there's this particular soap that you watched on any channel, any platform. If all of you have been watching it at your own respective places, the likelihood of you not giving it the same meaning is always there. Someone might be perceiving it in a particular manner and the other person wouldn't. So when we talk about audience analysis, it wouldn't be wrong for us to say that the focus of research is on the audience as well as on the content of media. For example, what do different audiences make of a particular television program? Researchers might focus, for example, on how TV news broadcasts about an international conflict affects the audience's knowledge and understanding of the conflict. Now, the view that we hold over here on Kashmir, has anyone tried to research how does the audience perceive it? The emphasis is on what audiences make of particular television programs. Researchers who adopt this approach see audiences as actively negotiating the meaning of messages rather than passively consuming them. The outcome of these negotiations range from acceptance of the message to indifference to total opposition. Do we all understand this? Everyone? Do we have any question? Anything? No?